Righty. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our ASPA, Hampton Roads webinar. Today, the topic is redefining waste management, engaging communities in composting and soil health. And my name is Celeste Green. I'm faculty and program coordinator at University of Virginia School of Continuing Professional Studies, and I'm newly the executive director of a nonprofit called Environmental Justice, the Center for Environmental Justice and Resilience. I'd like to introduce, or Robin, did you want to introduce yourself, my co-coordinator?
Sure. I represent ODU today. I'm working on my PhD in public administration and policy. And then full-time, I work with the Elizabeth River Project. I'm in charge of the youth programs. I have a floating classroom, run a nature park, Paradise Creek Nature Park, and we're very involved with stewardship and what you can do to help. So very interested in this topic.
Great. And Robin and I have worked together. We thought about a topic that was important for public administrators, because as we look into the future, a lot of municipalities are dealing with the same issue of running out of landfill space. And we have a lot of waste and we don't have a place to put it. As landfills fill up, we have to look for new places. And a lot of times, they become LULUs, what we call locally unwanted land uses, or NIMBY, not in my backyard. Nobody wants to have a landfill in their backyard. And so some of the things that are happening around the country, and one of our panelists today was supposed to be somebody from the Michigan Recycling Coalition, and then another panelist from Tidewater Compost, but they were not able to attend at the last minute due to a schedule conflict. But Michigan has passed legislation implementing composting and recycling statewide. California has some of the municipalities, San Francisco Bay Area has a zero waste policy where everybody has a black bin for waste, or blue bin for recycling, and a green bin for composting. And so this is happening around the country. It is a way for municipalities to save money, increase soil health, and also help draw down carbon from the atmosphere, which helps with climate change. So we wanted to talk about this issue to see, we're not really doing this on a large scale here in the Hampton Roads area, but there are things happening in the background. So we have some great speakers today, and I want to welcome Lily Such, who is president of Drishti Compost, and John Wilson. He's an environmental consultant and author, and they have collaborated. We invited them separately, but didn't realize they have collaborated. So they are joining us together, and want to welcome them and thank them for their efforts in this very important effort. And we're going to start off by showing, Lily is going to share her screen and just have a little short video that gives a little background on the topic and what they're actually doing. And then they'll open up for the presentation there. Okay, so if you want to go ahead, Lily.
Sure.
You can.
I'm also I've been composting since 1995. And I was a farmer, so I was doing it mostly for myself, but slowly people began to ask me to buy compost, and it slowly became a business.
Well, I am a chef here in Virginia Beach, and I have a couple food trucks and do private chef work, and been doing it for about 10 years. And I go through so many eggs and banana peels and bread grinds that I just decided I would try to bring it home and compost it in my backyard, but it was just, the volume was way too high. So I reached out to other friends of mine who are business owners and chefs in the area and just said, does anybody know where I can compost this on a large scale? And everybody said, no, there's nowhere. So I kept asking people, and Farmer John was the only person whose name would come up. And they would say, it's a little bit of like a hush hush thing because there's no such thing as a compost facility, but he's an old-fashioned organic true composter, so call him. So I did, and I went out to his site and saw what he was doing, and I would start bringing him my food scraps. And then we just decided that if we don't keep doing this and actually make compost and do it and show people, that nobody else is going to do it. So here we are, trying to work with the city, trying to work with everybody to learn how to make this happen and how to actually build a facility so that there is a place for people like us to compost if we want to.
John Wilson, also known as Farmer John. We make compost here, and we take your food scraps and all kinds of other scraps and make compost.
Good morning, I'm Lily and I'm here with Drishti Compost at our compost facility in Virginia Beach. What we've decided to do was tackle a problem that we feel is a growing issue every day. That problem is food waste. 40 to 50% of what you put in your trash can every day is food. That food goes to the landfill where it's trapped among layers of other synthetic and plastic materials where it's not able to decompose. Why is that a problem? It's a problem because as it tries to decompose, it's releasing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, worsening our climate. So, our solution here at Drishti Compost is to bring the food scraps back to the land. We mix it with other various organic matter like leaves, yard debris, and water and turn it into compost.
It's a very valuable product for growers of anything. And it also affects the water quality because water is held better in compost-rich soil.
Hi guys, I'm Liz with Drishti Compost here at our composting site, and we want to talk to you about the difference between dirt and soil. Here is our example of dirt. A little dry, flaky, something you would sweep off of your kitchen floor. And then we have soil. It is a living, breathing, thriving combination of microorganisms that make up the skin of our earth. It holds water and moisture content, carbon and nitrogen, which are essential for growing food and plants in your garden. And this was originally hay, food scraps, and manure, and look at it now. It's turned into a beautiful composition of compost. And out of these two, which one would you prefer to grow your food in?
My name is Jake Waring. I'm here with Drishti Compost. Last year I started a smoothie shop / juice bar, and was noticing my trash cans were just filling up with this gorgeous food, and knew there was another solution we could do with that stuff. I ended up linking up with Lily, who's been running her food truck for a while, Farmer John, who's a known farmer around town, and we wanted to repurpose our trash and really do something that was really a pure form of recycling. And so we started taking our trash out here to the farm where we're currently located, and it was very difficult. We were driving around our own trucks, hauling everything, and we quickly found out that it was a dirty, dirty job. And we wanted to find a better way to do it, and that's kind of currently where we're at with Drishti. So we're currently looking for more land, building a facility that could house all of our restaurants, our hotels, our schools, all of our food waste, and we can build a facility that can nourish our community a little bit better.
So one of the most concerning aspects or number one questions regarding compost is, does it smell bad? The answer is no if you do it properly. Here we take tremendous effort to turn our piles frequently, water them frequently, and cover them. You've probably heard horror stories about people's backyard piles or maybe other facilities where they were doing things differently. But here at Drishti we use old-fashioned, tried and true methods, turn it ourselves, water it ourselves, and just constant supervision, and that eliminates the chance of having any bad smells.
All right. Great. That's such a wonderful video and so informative. So I'd like to turn it over to Lily. And do you prefer to be called Farmer John?
It's up to you.
Okay.
Just John.
Just John. Okay. And John, just to really talk about, your experience and how you think we can take this to the next level? You know, what do we need to do to expand this and to really get the community more engaged?
Well, first I studied with some people from Austria, and they are award-winning. They got the award in Europe for microbiology, but they're farmers with no academic training. But they were eager to study this topic, and I learned from them. And when I learned how beautiful the process was and what you could create out of it, you know, I was lit up like a Christmas tree. And since then, I've learned that you can compost paper. I used to take fish scraps. I used to take leaves, bits of wood, any crop residues I had, and compost all that. And, you know, I've over the years learned how to make a very good product and never have much smell. So number one, it's possible. Number two, I've learned the great benefits of it. And now a new thing with Lily is learning how that we can transform the waste industry. And there are so many benefits to it. I won't name them all, but you know, some of them were mentioned in that video. So I quit farming, but you know, to help me stay out of trouble, I still compost. And I'm really glad that Lily and Jake and Liz came along, because I was going to sell all my equipment and retire. But, you know, somewhat despairing of anything good happening in this area. Because, you know, I also have some experience in the Bay Area. My daughter lived there, and I'd go look at the tiny trash bin compared to the bigger bins for recycling and composting. And I really love how they've transformed their system. And so I think we should be able to do, I don't know why we're so far behind the times here, but we should duplicate their efforts, you know. And you made a good point about the money, and we're really researching that right now.
Right. That there are financial benefits to reducing the cost for waste when we have less waste to be disposed of, and saving municipalities money on landfill costs. So there is a financial benefit, because that is always a concern, you know, with public administration, is we have to look at, you know, what is the cost of programs. I know my hometown in California, a small town in the Bay Area, they give out little composting containers for people to have in their homes, just, you know, to start out like that. So that could be something, you know, to talk with, you know, embracing localities, you know, to see if they would be willing to do that. That would be an investment, or people could buy them. But Lily, let's talk about you and your background, and a little bit more about how you came. I know you mentioned you came to know Farmer John because of your willingness to embrace, but you have a background in food management. You're doing your restaurants, and yeah. You mentioned about collaborating with schools, that there's a lot of potential to really reach a larger, you know, group with schools. Is a huge area, you know, not to mention private homeowners. But maybe just talk a little bit about what you've done so far.
Sure. And I grew up in a household where my mom had a compost pile in the backyard, and it was literally a pile on the ground, and we would just throw our food there, and food never went into the trash can. It's just how I was raised, but none of my friends had that experience. And I grew up in North Carolina on a lot of land, so it was a little bit different. But when I moved here and opened up my business, I was kind of blown away, because I thought, I want to compost. A lot of people want to compost, and there's just a lot of levels to it. One, they don't know how. Two, they don't know where. Three, you do need a little bit of help to get started understanding how to do it. Whether you want to do it in your backyard, or if you're a restaurant, you want to do it just with your own scraps, or if you just want to be participating from your level, where you just want to say, I want to help this to be established. So, and I learn still on a daily basis how many obstacles there really are in getting just a small plot of land for composting. But it really started with us. I realized that there's a lot of catch-22s. So the first step was, let's get a meeting with the city. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean the Department of Agriculture? Does that mean zoning? Does that mean economic development? I have no experience in this realm, so it's been a huge learning curve for me. So we would set up meetings with all of these different departments. And in every single meeting, we would say, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find land, zone it, and build a compost facility. And they would say, well, we've never done anything like that before. We're not really sure if that's going to work. Good luck. And we would say, okay. So we realized that we had to do it, prove to the city that there is a demand for it from large scale facilities like schools and restaurants, and prove that there's a demand for people to buy it, like the farmers. So we just kept composting, and more restaurants would reach out to us, and hotels, and they would say, we saw what you're doing on Instagram. We want to send our food scraps to you. So after about 6, maybe 8 months, we were able to take that visual and take that demand back to the same people at the city and say, look, people really want to do this, whether it's they want to pay to have their food scraps separated and collected, or they want to pay to buy the compost. Or they just want to support this in general because they're environmentally conscious. And so when we brought that to the table, the conversation changed a little bit. And we were able to get different people on board, various city folks who were willing to help us look for land, help us find grants. So it's been a slow process, but I would say that in the last probably 6 months, we've gained a ton of momentum just with finding land, with being able to understand the zoning that's involved. You have to find land that's zoned industrial. It can't be agriculture. It has to be certain distance from a neighborhood or water. It has to have a certain elevation. There's a lot of factors that go into this. So our current goal is sort of threefold. It's find the land and permit it and get the actual compost site built. But B, continue to talk to restaurants and schools and get more and more people involved, because the more people, the better the whole process works. The more input we have to actually make compost with, and just the more support we have in general. And then 3, that's the education factor. That's where we go to the schools, teach the students what composting is, why a banana peel belongs in a compost bin and not the trash can, and just educate neighbors. You know, people that live next door to me that see my compost pile in the backyard are bringing their food scraps over now. So there's building the facility, there's getting the people involved and actually creating all of these inputs. We need the manure, we need the food, we need hay, we need carbon, we need all kinds of things to make compost. It's not really that easy. And then 3, the education point. So we're kind of trying to tackle all 3 of those all at once right now.
Okay. If anybody has questions, if you could just type them in the chat, we can ask those to the panel. And in the meantime, I wanted to see, what municipalities have you collaborated with so far? You mentioned you've reached out to some different cities in the area. Who are you working with right now?
Right now, we're working with HRSD, which is actually a private company. I think they consider themselves a subsidiary of the government, but they are not a government company.
So Hampton Roads Sanitation District?
Yep, they're a local water treatment facility. They have 200 acres here in their Virginia Beach facility that they call their Progress Farm, that they're proactively trying to allocate parcels of that land to people that they feel like are going to use it to experiment in good ways, find ways to recycle biosolids, food, just kind of green waste management practices, which is really cool. They're one of the only people willing to say, hey, here's 20, 30 acres of land, do something on it. It's really hard to find land in general. So we're working with them. The Department of Agriculture has been really great. Honestly, everybody that we've reached out to is in support. It's just they almost don't know how to support us because this hasn't been done before. So that's kind of one of the challenges.
Okay.
Well, now I'd add one more thing that we're researching, and I already mentioned it, is how we are going to make enough money.
Yeah.
as well as the whole financial, cycle around who pays, what, because right now I have, it's not that much, but 100,000 in equipment, but we're going to need much more to create a better site and
Right.
do all the things. And as well, I've heard that DEQ is wanting to change their regulations. And I'm not sure that's true, but to separate us from a landfill.
Mm-hmm.
Because right now, as it stands right now, one of us has to get a landfill operator's license.
Right. There is no such thing as a compost operation. It all falls under municipal solid waste, meaning we're basically a landfill.
Mm-hmm. Have you all looked, and we do have a question. Michael says he would be interested in a pamphlet of introduction with the steps and partners you encountered. So that might be, I know that's another expense, but to make a pamphlet just to get out the word out.
Yeah.
Have you all looked at what other states, like you mentioned, John, that you have your daughter out in California, and I know with California, I've spoken with the head of the zero waste program there, and that came down like this. They passed that as legislation, the city of San Francisco. Then I talked about Michigan, and they passed it as legislation. So it came down so that it was from, the government. It sounds like with this, it's more of a private public partnership at this point. And so it'd really be something to enact to get the cities engaged. It would have, if we talked to city councils at all in areas.
Yes, and everybody with city council that we've met with has been super supportive. The support from all of the people is there. It's just, I don't think that as far as Virginia Beach or Hampton Roads is concerned, that we will have much financial support from the government whatsoever. We're a nonprofit. I think our only way forward is to get federal grants, to work with private donations, to build the facility ourselves and sustain ourselves. Because when we've met with economic development and the city, they say we love this idea, but any extra funds we have gone to try to save our recycling program, and there's nothing left. And they were very straightforward and honest about that. So we've kind of had to go in a different direction. And honestly, it always seems to boil down to the person that's running this program or this municipality. If they're really gung-ho about composting, then they help us a lot. And if they're not, then we just don't get much help from them. So it can be kind of frustrating sometimes.
Okay, yes, I can see that. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Okay, go ahead, Michael.
Celeste, I'm always sitting back and coming up with ideas. And I think, I'm telling you now, listen to me, Lily, Farmer John, listen to me. Walmart, Lowe's, and Home Depot would love your story.
Oh.
And they would be willing to this, because you need the money. You need the money. And their foundations, as well as I went through this process years ago. And I think that they would gravitate not only to the story, but to the right now in the moment, with this being a really big idea about moving towards corporate responsibility and environmental awareness. I think that this idea, they would put your bags, come up with a beautiful logo. They put your bags out there. The process is not that difficult. And just being inside Home Depot, being inside Lowe's with a little pamphlet about your story and reaching out to corporate, Home Depot, Lowe's, and especially Walmart with their history, would be a place to make the money you need in order to pay for Farmer John's equipment and support this going forward.
Okay, that's a great idea. Those public-private partnerships, and that could be something to explore. Stephen, you had your hand up.
Thank you for that idea.
Yeah, that's huge. I'd never thought of that.
Okay, Stephen, you're on mute still.
Sorry. Yes, I would double down with what Michael said. The PPP is an excellent way to start. And I was thinking of Lowe's and or Home Depot, Walmart, any of those, I think there's a literature out there with corporate social responsibility, and more of the larger organizations, larger corporations, like what we just mentioned, that would be in line with what you're talking about, would be more than willing to communicate with you. I'm sure you just have to find a way to communicate with them. Who do you go to? I don't think it would be as difficult as it is sometimes with government entities. It's usually better with local entities, local government entities, to try to do that. More difficult at the federal level, of course. But I mean, I think that they probably have corporate social responsibility, corporate responsibility organizations, programs, et cetera, that are there. They can probably help you with your financing, your funding. And they certainly would be supporters of something like that, because they know they are a part of the community, and they know they want to be good partners with individuals in the community. And that means not just the people who are their customers, but people who are ultimately benefiting in many other ways that what they do. So yeah, I think that's an excellent example, excellent point by Michael. And I think that would be a good way to go. It doesn't mean that you don't go with government, because obviously you're going to have to work with local government in order to get the zoning and get the economic and anything else that can be there. But if you got to go to the private sector, then go to that part of the private sector, which is going to be most beneficial for you. And that's going to be these Walmarts, Home Depots, and et cetera. And I wouldn't necessarily throw away the mom and pop stores. They're still out there. And they may be of some help and assistance as well. Folks like John will probably know them more so. And I'm sure that they will be there. But you probably look at that and you say, well, how can one small mom and pop entity help me get this major thing going? And that's where the Lowe's and the Home Depots and the Walmarts come into play.
And I guess to me that I mean, it's such a good idea. It's also so intimidating. I wouldn't even know how to begin to try to reach out, or who. Do you know that, Michael? Do you know?
Yeah, I'll ask Michael. I think he's going to help.
Michael, do you know people at Home Depot that I can?
Well, here's the thing. Here's the thing. You just be bold. First of all, you have a story that is compelling. So even if you were to email that to your public relations person, the story, they would gravitate. And you don't want to lead the horse to water. The horse will go to water when they're that big. They'll go, wait a minute, boss, I think I have a great marketing thing, because they're always thinking about the bottom line. And when I reached out to Walmart years ago for a Chinese organization that were trying to develop like little knickknacks, when I started talking to them, they will lead you to the people that need to go. And this needs to be a part of your experience as well, because I'm sure it's changed. But they'll be very receptive to you just calling Walmart corporate and saying, look, I'm trying to get my product, and they'll send you right to who you need to go, because I'm sure that's changed. But be bold. You've already, once you get one of these, it's just going to snowball. And you've always got me and Celeste with pom-toms going, go, go, go.
Thank you.
You can do this. You've got this.
Well, and also I think, there are a lot of people that have, I think that's a great idea. And I think Stephen and Michael for mentioning that, of partnering with, a large corporation. But as you mentioned, it does come back to working with government and getting them on board. And I think that that's where you have to approach it as, this can save money. That this will actually help the environment. It's you have to create the whole picture, because again, with public administrators, it's like, how much, will this program cost? But when you look at, landfills are running out, and the city of Norfolk, they were just on one of the morning shows saying, encouraging recycling, because landfill space is at a premium and we need to get more recycling. But we don't really bring composting into the conversation. As you mentioned in the video, Lily, 40 to 50% of our household waste is compostable. So it is not waste at all. And that's where I think we have to just get that into our mindset, that it's not waste. It belongs back in the earth. And even just starting with leaves, leaves are meant to go back into the earth to provide nutrients to the trees. You see so many bags of leaves every fall, and where are they going? To the landfill. And so those little bits, can really help our communities, and it is starting across the country. So we are kind of, a little slower to adapt here, but I think there is potential. Robin, you had your question?
Yes, I just wanted to share that we are applying, meaning the Elizabeth River Project is applying next week. So you're going to need to write this date down. It's a very simple online application to Lowe's. It's due February 20th. and it's called Lowe's Hometowns.
Oh,
And what it says is they're accepting nominations for signature project grants. And then to nominate a project, I mean, this is going to take you like maybe 10 minutes to fill out. Most grants are really long. This one's not. And then I also wanted to say, I feel like I've seen a YouTube video or something where it was at the neighborhood level of composting, where they took a little green space in a neighborhood and people would just put out a bucket at the street and they would switch off of who would take with their bike and pull a wagon and pick up all the buckets and then take it to their little green space. So they had like a neighborhood composting. And I was wondering if you all promote that also, and if that's successful.
we go out of our way to talk, DM, email, text message, anyone that has a question at all about any composting, whether it's, hey, I have a pile in my backyard and can I put meat in it? Or, hey, I want to open a facility. So any questions we feel are wonderful, as long as people are starting to have it. It just gets a little tricky because you can throw your food waste and your leaves in a pile in your backyard and it will break down, but there's a fine line between really good microbial activity at the right temperature in the right environment. Does it have enough water in it? Are you incorporating oxygen? Because how we spoke earlier about bad compost, you can make really harmful compost too. So it's a good habit that these people want to get into. Like neighborhood compost piles are great, but if no one's really knows what they're doing, then they can actually be making something that's got bad microbial activity happening.
It's called phytotoxins, and you can create things that are harmful to your plants and soil and think, oh, I'm doing something good making compost. But that's the system I learned is called CMC, controlled microbial composting. So we control the decomposition process, and that makes all the difference in the world. Plus getting the ingredients right in the first place.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in their backyard bins just go wrong because all they put in it is food. And they don't turn it or anything. And it's not difficult. It's not a lot of work. You just have to maybe go out there every couple of days and spend 5 minutes at the pile. But if you don't know what you're looking for or looking at, it can just be a whole challenge to someone that has no idea what they're doing. So part of another tier of what we're trying to tackle is the community education aspect, where we host just community compost parties where we say, everyone bring your compost bin and come, and we'll stand there and show you, this is what carbon is, this is what nitrogen is. If you're going to put food in your compost pile, make sure you're throwing leaves or straw in there, layering them so that you have layers of brown, layers of green, and that you're watering it enough so that the activity can actually occur, because breakdown won't occur if it's completely dry. So there's just a couple little things that we have to kind of teach people before we want to say, get out there and do it yourself.
Right.
Sure, I understood that question completely, but we are hoping to get home buckets also eventually. Yeah. At first, we're going to approach grocery stores, restaurants, places where a trucker, because we've got somebody, can go and, like I've done my first load of 6,000 pounds of food waste from this guy. And
most of which came from Wegmans, by the way. So there's grocery stores here in town and hotels who have been composting for years, and nobody knows that they're doing it. So we're also trying to let the community know, hey, by the way, here are the restaurants and grocery stores and people who are taking their time and spending the extra money to be composting, so that special support can be given to those places.
Right.
And in terms of home composting and what we're doing, it is easier to get the compost to break down properly when you have a certain amount.
Yeah.
A larger amount. And then the way we do it, we get finished compost in, 6 to 8 weeks. And it's like you
Very
can't
fast.
find any parent material. And it's pretty phenomenal.
The more mass you have, the hotter the interior of the pile can get, and the quicker the actual decomposition can occur. So like my backyard pile would never break down this quickly. It's just
No.
it's just that we have so much material, and we have manure that we're given from the horse farms locally, straw, hay. We have so many good ingredients coming to us.
Mhm.
Farm that we're able to do it at a very optimal level. It's very difficult to do in your backyard. It's doable. It's just not anywhere near as easy as on a large scale.
Yeah, and I would also like to say one more thing, that's nothing is isolated. This is a cyclical thing. Everything is cyclical, like water. You know, we're drinking the same water dinosaurs drank. Okay, it's the same stuff recycled over and over again. And this is part of the food system. And we hope to eventually engage with school gardens, community gardens, urban agriculture, and really get this part of the cycle in its place, back in its place, where it all goes around and around. And so, yeah, we're just hoping to enter that cycle.
Right. Okay. Have you all reached out to any other areas, like I mentioned, like cities that have had it going, and seeing kind of what they've done to get it going, and use some of those steps to get it off the ground here, kind of?
Yes, and the closest one that we have is a facility called McGill. It's about 70 miles away. It's in Waverly, Virginia. They do a really great job. They're category 4, meaning there's categories 1 through 4. 1 is you only accept, let's say, yard debris. It's the cleanest, it's the simplest. Category 2 is yard debris and maybe like vegetable and fruit scraps, pre-consumer. Category 3 is what we are and would continue to be, which means manure, pre and post consumer scrap. So like if you're at a restaurant, you scrape your plate off into the compost bin. Yard waste, leaves, manure, straw, bedding from farms and things like that, but not sludge. Category 4 is everything I just discussed and what's technically considered sludge. So biosolids, things like that. Those are a lot trickier as far as all of the regulations involved. And we feel that the compost that's produced from our feedstock, meaning just the category 3 things, we feel produces optimum gardening compost. Sludge to us is just a little bit questionable. I would rather
Right.
with what we make than category 4, but what they're doing is wonderful because they're still turning it back into a resource as opposed to the landfill.
Right.
Are a for-profit business. Black Bear Composting in Western Virginia. I've talked to the owner there. He's wonderful. He's a for-profit business. He owns the land. He bought the equipment. It seems like it's either somebody takes it on themselves and it's their business and it's their livelihood, and they just go through all these loops and challenges and they take it on financially, or someone in the government in that particular city really made this happen and they had the financial ability to do it. We're kind of neither of them. We're a nonprofit, so we're trying to do it from scratch. So it's a little bit challenging because we haven't come across anybody who's in our shoes as far as that goes. I know that I talked to the Department of, I forget what they're called, but in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they come by and collect your food scraps from your house. It's called Cambridge composting, I believe. But the more I learned about it, I called and talked to a bunch of people, asked them how their process works. Do they do what we do, which is windrow style? You saw in the video, we have those long piles on the ground. And it turns out they're not composting it. They're turning it into pellets that they sell to farms. Still better than going to the landfill, but it's not compost. It's not a soil. There's no living microactivity.
Okay.
There's so many different levels, and no one's really monitoring or regulating what people are calling their compost. So like we discussed initially, you might see a bag of compost at Home Depot or at your local nursery. You have no idea what's in there. We have no idea. So making it yourself or having someone who's been doing it for 30 years, who's studied it, are really your only two good options.
Okay. Yeah, those are some good points. And it's interesting to see the levels, tier 1 to tier 4. I think tier 4 people would be a little apprehensive of that. You know,
and those are the ones
starting out at the lower levels, you know, and working with. Stephen has a question. So let's turn to Stephen.
Yeah, no, have you guys reached out to states which one of their primary businesses, if you will, is farming? For example, I was born and raised in Iowa, and I know composting was big, and it started individually as well as corporately. Well, I'm sure it began earlier, but when we were there, moved there in the mid-60s, my dad started, got it as sort of a family deal. Let's do a compost in the back. And it's like, we had no idea, why are we doing this? It's as mucky, ucky, what are we doing? But it made some sense, and we were using it for our garden once it was done. So we probably some things he didn't do right or we didn't do right, but we had the right idea, which was to do everything that you've said from the standpoint of a stewardship of the environment to make things better. But I would think in the Kansases and the Indianas and the Iowas and the South Dakotas, et cetera, there's probably going to be some that are going to be for-profits, nonprofits. They're going to be categories 1 through 4 or 3 and 4 where you're at. So I would think, I don't know if you know of anybody in those particular areas, or you can find somebody that help you in those particular areas. But I would think go to where that would be most likely to be doing. I'm not saying Virginia is not a good place to start, because there is farming in Virginia, but I mean, you know, go to the center of the United States where you've got the farming industry, which is much bigger and much more experienced in many ways. That might be a step out as well.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I have not talked to anybody at the state level, but that's a good idea.
Well,
Go ahead, John.
first began to study was in Pennsylvania.
That's
And
good too.
And so I saw all the places that were composting. That's where I learned how to compost. And in fact, that's where my equipment first came from, even though it was built in Austria. So I know what you're talking about. I've seen that system in Pennsylvania, several different farms, and I've seen the one in California. And I watch a show called, what's it called? Growing a Greener World with Joe somebody. Oh, what's his name?
Yeah, that's on PBS.
Yeah, it's on PBS. And, you know, I've watched his show before a few times. But the fact is, I started composting 95. You know, I come from the school of, you know, learning the slow way. Because when I first started to farm, it was side by side with composting. Because I didn't grow up on a farm. I started out my career as a carpenter. And so I've learned a lot since 95. And I keep reading books and going to places. And so we have done that. It's a very good idea to see what other people are doing. But I think we're pretty well positioned to move to the next level. Because as I said, I compost for one farm and sales, and I used to build gardens. Not too many farmers around here wanted to buy my compost or change the way they farm. And anyway, also I want to say I'm never going to get rich off this book, but I have a book that's out that gives good talking points because it's a collection of columns for all of these things. And I think you are the kind of people that would like it. And you can get it at, what's it called? Kate's Next Door Market online, or a few places around town.
What's the name of the book?
From the ground up.
From the ground up.
Okay.
But it's
Okay.
good. It's got, I think it's a good collection of talking points.
Yeah.
For just the kind of thing that we're doing right here. And
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
what I've seen, one of my students lives in Chicago and in an apartment, and she puts a little bucket out every other week, and they come and then put a bag of compost. So she has that in an apartment dwelling. My father, I grew up in Northern California. He was composting a huge pile in the 70s and would spread it all over the backyard and put worms in, and vermiculture. That's a big part of it as well. So vermiculture is something I think that we're really at the beginning. I think it's really spreading nationwide. And I think Stephen brings up a good point, that to reach out to other states that are doing it. California, I'm sorry, our panelists from Michigan, because that was somebody who could really talk about what they're doing on a larger scale. But I think when you reach out, and I think there's people here that could lend some support and make some contacts with, municipalities to get them engaged. Marina?
Yes, thank you, Celeste. John, you just mentioned the fact that not a lot of farmers would want to use the soil that you guys produce. What is the end product? Like, how do you distribute it? Because that's something that's, I think, is interesting and hasn't been touched yet. That's the point.
well, for a farmer, I had a 20-acre farm, and so that was doable. I had a lime spreader that I used because it had just the right kind of discharge that I could drive, over the field and spread compost over a 40-foot section, 40-foot wide and as long as it would stay full. But for larger farms,
It's expensive.
the distribution, I would say, almost would be better done with compost tea. Then and there's a whole process with that also. You don't just, put a little compost in a bucket of water and, but you increase the numbers of microbiology, bacteria, fungus, and you can tailor the compost tea to either being fungal dominated or bacterial dominated, depending upon the crop you're going to grow. But you can take a very small amount of compost and increase the number of life forms in the compost tea and spread it. And if you combine that with a good cover crop, which is growing a crop, cutting it, turning it under, but it's another whole subject. But
Basically, if you're a small regenerative farmer, like Pungo Farms here buys our compost, I think the question that you asked was, what is the end product? For us, it is humus, which is soil that's filled with millions of living microorganisms. For Pungo Farms, I think he's got 10 acres and he just grows spinach and cauliflower. For him, it makes sense, and he buys our compost from us. But from someone who maybe has 100 or 200 acres and they're growing just one crop, it would be probably too expensive and too difficult to spread on 200 acres to buy something like our compost. What John was saying is if you turn it into compost tea, which is liquid form, it's much more condensed, and you're able to sort of cover more acreage with something like that. It's just, it depends on the size and the style of the farm that you have.
And yeah, that's absolutely true. And I would add that the end product, what you're buying is, yes, organic matter, and you're buying trace minerals that are hard to get sometimes, but most importantly, you're buying microbes. Microbes do all of the important work in the earth and in our bodies. But
a poor compost would not have much microbial activity at all in it, and a bad compost would have lots of harmful microbial activity in it. So that's kind of where it gets a little bit tricky.
Just this one more thing about that. I have to stop myself sometimes from talking too much, but because it's a long and interesting story, but there is a symbiotic relationship between plants and microbes. And so when you want to feed a plant, say, and you put chemical fertilizer, there's different estimates, but 10% only goes to the plant. 90% goes in our waterways. And
Right.
when you make compost, all of it stays in the soil until the plant calls for it in a very complex system. And so you get no water pollution, you get no air pollution, you get water holding capacity.
And optimal plant growth.
So you're buying microbes.
Right.
You're buying other things, but you're buying microbes. And again, as I say, I could talk more about it if you wanted to, but they do all the important work in the soil.
And you create them by having your compost at the right temperature and by turning it and making sure it has oxygen and then letting it not only get to that point where it's broken down, but then mature, which means to stabilize, so that once you sell it to someone, there's no harmful activity that's occurring, like in the compost that somebody brought up in the beginning.
Right. Okay. Well, let me get to Gary. He has his hand up. Gary?
Yeah, thank you, Celeste. This is really a tremendous sort of presentation as an environmentalist. I just have a general question about marketing. It seems that organic farming or organic farmers would just have a much more natural incentive to be responsive. I don't really know that much about the farm here, but it seems to me that there's not a lot of organic farming. So is that part of, you think of just, if you had more organic farms, you'd have more receptivity to this?
Absolutely. Yeah. In places like, I went to the Culinary Institute up in New York in the Hudson Valley, and everyone up there grows their own food, composts their own food. At the culinary school, we had compost bins in every classroom. And it's a habit. It's like, if you do it and your neighbors do it and everyone around you does it, it's just ingrained in you. But if no one's doing it around you, then nobody continues to do it. So that was a huge thing that I learned in Virginia Beach, is I thought, I never see a compost bin anywhere. So yes, I think I'm starting to see a lot more small organic farmers on the Eastern Shore of Virginia popping up. Some farms are only 2 or 3 acres, others are 5 or 6. But they are starting to reach out to us and buy our compost, which is really cool to see happen, because they're buying land that for the last 50, 60 years was monocrop. I don't know what was being grown on it, but they're doing regenerative things with it now. So I think there's some really exciting things happening.
Good, thank you.
I know we have just a couple more minutes, or actually if people need to get off, that's fine. I just wanted to just thank you all for coming today, and to know that we are, I think, moving in the right direction here. And if people are interested in learning more about this, please reach out to me and I can put you in touch with Lily and John. I'd like to stay in touch and just to see what we can do to help, bring municipalities and households on board. It's great with farmers, but just people know I've been composting here at my house for decades, and, using it in my garden, that at the household level, that people can really increase their garden and eliminate that waste going into the waste stream. So there's so many benefits with farmers, with households, with schools, getting restaurants, that the potential is really very big, and it can do such a public good. So I just want to say thank you all. Go ahead, Lily.
If any of you all know city council members or know anybody that you feel is at a government level, I think just having that conversation and then saying, hey, do we have a composting facility, starts them. They've come to me lately in the last year and said, all of a sudden everyone's asking about composting and asking about, do we have a facility? And that just asking questions, regardless of where you live, I think really shows that people care about it, and that it's becoming something people talk about. So the more we talk about it, the more of a movement forward we can make.
Okay. Yes, I do know my council member, Rocky Holcomb, and I'd be happy to talk with him and set up a meeting. Patrick Duhaney, the city manager, there's a lot of potential. Again, if we look at the cost benefits, we have to look at that, and the potential not only for better soil, but also just, looking at eliminating all that waste, that it is not waste. So that's why we call this redefining waste. What we consider waste is really not waste. We have uses for it.